welcome back to another episode of Real Estate Renovators. For those who don't know, Real Estate Renovators is a business advisory show for real estate professionals. Now, before I continue on, my two co-hosts have had a serious word with me about the fact that I haven't been introducing them into segments. I'm confident, and I'm going to get a poll up after this. Who doesn't know who Rexa Frasiabi and Bill Nicopoliopoulos are by this stage in filming? But I need to introduce them anyway and ask them, how are you today, Rexy? Are you okay?
Better now.
Better now that you've been introduced?
Yes,
I'm
thank you.
so glad. Have you had a good week?
We did not have a go at her whatsoever.
Lies.
Just putting it out there.
Lies. You been well though? How's the week been?
Week's been busy. Melbourne's back alive again, so been going out too much, I suppose. Saw Hamilton last night. If anyone hasn't seen Hamilton, amazing show. It's like R&B, theatre, and Broadway. It's like, yeah.
Not like the show that you and I went to and we walked out halfway because it was...
I wanted to stay, but someone walked out.
Anyway, we won't go into that. And to my left, Mr. Nicopoliopoulos, how are you?
I'm well. One day I'm going to make you say my real
Can we
surname.
just say it? Can we just say it out loud?
Do you want to do it together?
Yeah.
Nicolazakis.
Nicolazakis.
Well done. See,
No, I
you
want
got it.
Nicolazakis. I really want to dance.
Well, our last guest wanted to break some plates and have a dance, so maybe we
I
could
don't
do
know why
it
we
next
didn't.
time.
We should have let
We
him go
should've.
rogue. But
I
anyway...
have Versace plates.
Versace plates. But anyway, today we have a super interesting guest. I'm sure many people in the industry would have heard the name Emily Wallace, buyer's advocate extraordinaire. Would you say that, Bill?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one. Obviously, there's a lot of buyers advocates now. It's becoming more and more popular, but she's got a different spin on it, sort of a new starter that's come up really quick.
Very social media driven.
I was going to say
well.
using different, if you let me finish.
Sorry.
I was going to say using different marketing mediums to get her message out, which is awesome.
I was talking about TikTok 2 years ago and everyone was laughing at me, but people have now built and basically businesses from TikTok. Are you one of those people, Rexy?
I've just set up a TikTok account.
Show us some TikTok dances.
Yeah.
Maybe afterwards. I'm still rehearsing them. But I'm looking forward to having Emily on. I've been following her on social media. I haven't met her, but I've spoken via online before. So looking forward to meeting her. I like those Friday floor plans she puts up, different floor plans.
Super cool.
Yeah.
I think it allows a really wide audience to be able to have a snapshot of what happens in the buyer's advocate world. Interestingly as well, Rexy, similar to myself, she was a teacher of all things before she transitioned over to real estate. So we're going to dissect a lot of that, her story into becoming a buyer's advocate, and obviously, a lot of things that are happening on the market, which I'm sure everyone is intrigued to know about at the moment. So without further ado, let's bring to you Emily Wallace. And welcome. Thanks so much, Emily, for being part of our panel and our show today.
Thanks for having me. Really excited.
Such a pleasure. I think our audience in particular are going to be tuning in and listening to every piece of advice that you give them, particularly with such a unique and I would say volatile market we're in right now, right, Rexy?
And even not just volatile, but people don't really quite understand what an advocate does to start with.
Yes.
It's not so common in Australia compared to some other parts of the world. So can we start there? What do you do?
Great question. So a lot of people do get us confused with a real estate agent, and that is like complete opposite to what we are. So we buy properties. We represent the buyer in the property transaction to help them find off-market properties, also on-market properties, and negotiate the deal, basically taking their hand through the whole process from sourcing, inspecting, and negotiating the deal.
So can I ask, Emily, who needs a buyer's advocate? So say, for example, right now I'm buying a home.
Yep.
So I'm looking at realestate.com, I'm going to opens. What's the benefit of me then not doing that and choosing to, hire or adopt a buyer's advocate?
Yeah, definitely. I guess there's a couple of things that come into it. Number one would be that it's basically our full-time job is to hunt out properties. So we're essentially best friends with as many agents as possible to get into properties that other people can't, so off-market properties. There's also a lot of things that happen in the real estate transaction that can only really come with experience. I guess in any profession, there's things you pick up, there's lingo that you know, there's red flags to look out for that an advocate would pick up for you and potentially save you a fair bit of money in mistakes that might be made.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is time. Like we literally work pretty much 7 days a week when someone else is, usually young professionals holding down their own job or running their own business and then trying to also be their own advocate. It can get really tiring and actually takes the joy out of buying the property. It becomes a chore. Yeah.
I can relate. I'm experiencing that right now, to be honest, Emily. And I lost out on a property to a buyer's advocate recently. So I've got a personal vendetta and I need to use them.
Personal vendetta.
Exactly right. Now, I guess Rexy was really, really intrigued to know with the rise of flexible working.
Yeah, let's start with your career. So my understanding is that you started off as a teacher of all things. You know, Chanell was a teacher as well.
Oh, wait,
Yes.
there you go.
Were you primary?
Yeah, primary.
Me too.
Yeah,
Small world.
Yes. So I studied and finished my degree. I actually knew in my final year I didn't want to be a teacher. And funnily enough, I went into education recruitment after that. So I was finding teachers to go into schools and things like that.
Interesting.
Yeah. So my recruiting skills then effectively now into hunting properties has been quite a good transfer of skills. But it was never actually my intention to ever start my own business. I actually started my own advocacy because no one else would take me as an advocate.
Oh.
Yes.
What made you
So
want to
because you were
choose
too
advocacy?
young? Is that why?
Too young, not enough experience,
Yeah.
don't know property, don't have connections. So I, now looking back on it, it was a very, it was a big risk. At the time, I didn't feel like it because I didn't know any different, but I pretty much quit my corporate job at 25 at the time with probably about 4.5 months worth of savings to get me by without having anything else to back me, and went into it with no one really knowing
It's the
my
best
name.
when that happens, though. You've got the fire in your belly
Yes,
and no
yes.
money in the bank.
Yeah.
What better recipe,
Yes.
right,
Yeah.
Bill,
It's
for
actually-
success?
It's actually a common story. You hear a lot about people that have gone out on a limb, and it's one of those things like you're cutting the umbilical cord, right? You either win or lose. You're all in, and sometimes that's the best way to do it. You know, you don't really have a choice but to win and to
Literally.
and to succeed.
And the
Yeah.
most successful business owners, I would say as well, they don't actually go, hey, I'm planning to open my own business.
No.
It just happens because if you're extremely passionate about what you do and you've got that drive and that fire in your belly, it just happens to be that you sort of step onto that entrepreneur path. Whereas the ones that actively sort of go, I want to open my own business, what can I open it in?
Yeah.
It doesn't really work out.
Yeah, and I think probably the biggest thing is I saw a massive gap in the market, which was first and family home buyers. A lot of advocates, or the perception of a buyer's advocate, is really big purchases. You know, that probably comes from watching The Block and people have a reference point of that, or that their purchase might be too small, maybe they can't afford an advocate. So that was really the gap in the market that I was like, right, I want to be an advocate and I only want to buy homes that people live in.
Interesting.
So what's the rate? How do you calculate what do you pay an advocate for someone who hasn't used an advocate before?
Yeah, certainly. So there's two main models. One is a percentage-based model, which usually comes from sales agents who have jumped over into buying property, and roughly about 2% is around industry standards, sort of the same as the selling model of the purchase price. The only issue with that is the more that the buyer spends, the more they pay the advocate. If you've got a sliding budget, then you know, how does that kind of work? The other model is a fixed fee model, which is how we operate. So it's usually a retainer anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 up front.
So it's not much at all.
It's not too bad to be engaged, and then a success fee upon a successful purchase, which is varying, but I would say ballpark somewhere between 15 to 20 grand, depending on the purchase size.
Certainly worth the investment, isn't it? If it means it's going to save you that amount of time
And stress. You're going for it now. It can be very stressful.
Not to mention the ability to negotiate and potentially getting a better price,
And
where
take
that
the
might
motion
be a
out of it as
fraction
well.
of what you might save them.
Or
Yeah,
get a property
definitely.
that's not available.
Yeah, that's probably
Normal
the biggest thing is examples of off-market properties that we've had to an opportunity to purchase at a certain price point, and then we see them go online and see what they sell for, and people would have saved our fees 5, 6, 10 times over.
Yeah.
Like, it's
What
crazy.
percentage is off market?
For us personally, we're sitting at 71% of purchases.
Wow.
That's I
because
wouldn't
the
say that's
market?
industry standard though. It really depends how friendly you are with agents as to what you get access to. I would say there's about a third of the market that sits off market in total.
So interesting. Can I ask Emily a slightly more technical question? I mean, particularly more with the market. So with the post-COVID environment, we've obviously seen a huge change in the real estate market, and with the rise of flexible working, that inner city shorter commute is no longer as desirable as it used to be, which I assume is driven the prices down slightly in that. So my question is, what are you seeing happening in the market now, and where are sort of the hot places that you're sourcing properties, and where is the demand coming from?
Definitely. So certainly correct around the inner city has taken a bit of a hit. There's a lot of incentives for people to try and buy, I guess, lowering prices and things like that to get people into those properties. Look, who knows, maybe that'll bounce back and come around full circle in 10 years and people who buy now actually come out really good. But who's to say? No crystal ball, as that's a common saying in real estate, I guess. In terms of where the hotspots are right now, it's probably what I call the middle ring, particularly if we're thinking about Melbourne. For example, places like Coburg and Pascoe South and Reservoir, they're really taking off because people are realising they're actually still within a 10 to 12k radius to the CBD. There's a big land space available to them as well, and they're actually really good communities to be a part of. So that Bayside corridor is sort of like a premium area. The north and parts of the east and potentially parts of the west are actually getting a bit of attention because the dollars stack up and it really makes sense.
So it sounds like those middle ring suburbs where properties get a little bit bigger. You got that extra room for the Bernard Salter heard him present the other day, calls it the Zoom room.
The Zoom room, yes.
Not to be confused
Love
with
Bernard,
the similar kind of name, but the Zoom room. And so having that space for those types of rooms seems to be really important at the moment.
Accommodation is the biggest factor. So people who were looking, even we've dealt with couples who are looking for a 3-bedroom property, just the two of them, but they need an office each. So, the size of the property is actually really coming into play.
Do you work predominantly with owner buyers or owner occupiers or investors? And when you're buying it, do you look at what they need to live in, or do you look at it from an investment point of view? Like what's going to
great
increase?
question. So we personally only buy properties that someone will live in or eventually live in. So for example, we call them an investment with purpose. So someone might buy their downsizer home now, but they're not actually going to live in it for 5 to 7 years. But it's dictated by the area they want to live in. So we're always looking at why one property would be a better choice over another. But because it is a home that someone's going to live in, we're not crunching numbers on the stats of, you will get X amount of growth out of this. But definitely when it comes down to 2 properties, it's pretty evident why one would be a better long-term choice over another. Yeah.
And one thing that I wanted to learn more about was this course that you've got for first home buyers.
Yeah. So there are plenty of first home buyers out there who really want to engage an advocate, but maybe budget restrictions and the deposit that they've spent so long saving up doesn't lend itself towards having a full service advocate. So I do have a first home buyers course that I've made, which pretty much takes a buyer through from pre-approval all the way through until settlement. So how do they find their own off-market properties? How do they negotiate? What questions should they be asking in an open home? What lingo is involved in real estate? So pretty much from A to Z, how to buy a property.
How great is that? I've never heard of anyone doing something like this.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are just completely unaware of how to go about the first home buyer process.
Especially if it's your first property, right?
Yeah.
Like even just the basics of how a conveyancer works and all those types
even that you need one. Some people like conveyancer or surveyor. They get confused between the two.
Can I ask, Emily, I read a really interesting statistic the other day that for if you were I guess what are they called? Not millennial. What are they called? The generation now. Gen Z. I'm like Gen Z, Gen Y. If you're a Gen Z now without any sort of intergenerational wealth, it will take you 10 years to save a house deposit for the medium house price in Melbourne. If you were to save 15% of your average of your salary for 10 years. So what do you
based
predict?
On today's figures.
Like how would you?
And that's only going to go up with the new taxes and
exactly.
Victoria.
And I think that the cost of living and the cost of property in comparison to the average income is not matching up.
No.
So what do these first home buyers do? And like what do you predict is going to happen with the property market? Is it just not the Australian dream anymore for Gen Zs to come in and buy a home?
Potentially. It's actually very disheartening for a lot of people. I think there's a couple of things that people need to be aware of. So guarantor loans is one thing that really flies under the radar that people don't quite, probably more so the parents don't understand how that kind of works and how you can leverage that. Then there seems to be a lot more sort of programs and incentives coming through in the private sector where similar to the government program where you can have a shared equity set up or you can waive the LMI for a certain deposit amount. In the private space, it's actually becoming a bit more common. Obviously, there must be some benefit if it's in the private space to these companies, but they are becoming options. Some people are seeking them out. But to be honest with you, a lot of people are turning towards rent vesting and buying where they can afford. Like I'm a rent vestor myself and I've bought where I can afford. I bought a couple of properties to get under my belt before being able to sort of land all my dollars in a family home. But yeah, the reality is some people do have to compromise or they're renting for a very, very long time without investment elsewhere, which is a little bit scary for the economy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're going to continue this conversation right after a short break. back. Bill, let's take it away.
Yeah, so just before we had that little break, I just wanted to ask you talked about a little bit about your first home buyers and that market and your course. And when I was doing research on you before this episode, I just thought you got an awesome social media presence. So tell us a bit about that and how I'm assuming, I don't know, but I'm assuming you have to get right out of your comfort zone to start doing this stuff and how great it's been for your profile.
Yeah, for sure. So social media, as we would all know, is such a big avenue for awareness, for business and for connection. And to be honest with you, I probably didn't really think twice about really leveraging it because I know there's a lot of fear around being on camera and people, talking about what they do and providing information. But I went to an event hosted by someone who was sort of in the marketing social media space. And he basically said, you can never be in enough places. No one can ever see your face enough. If they're seeing too much of you, that's a good thing. And I think I really took that quite literally. And I was like, right, I'm going to blast everywhere. And I used to do a lot more on LinkedIn in the beginning, just educational content. And then obviously Instagram, podcasting, Facebook.
TikTok as well, haven't you?
Not TikTok.
Oh.
I think I do have a TikTok account, but I haven't used it yet.
Okay.
I probably do need to get on TikTok. But I really think there's this word called omnipresence, and that means you're literally everywhere at one time. And I think for people to recognize my face and my voice, even I've met you guys for the first time today in person, it's, we all feel like we know each other because of social media. But the one thing, particularly in the real estate space about social media is, I think a lot of people only post their successes. I think, there's people out the front of a sold board, another one sold, or how much commission they're making. And that's not, it's great, don't get me wrong, but it's not very relevant.
Who's benefiting?
It's also not real. One thing I noticed about yours is very genuine. It's not about, big noting and things like that. It's all genuine. Yeah. But one thing that our marketing, Audrey, big shout out to her, says all the time that about 80% of people, even if they follow you, don't see a post. Yep. So if you think you're posting too much, you're probably not, because about 80% of them don't even see each post. So if you post every day, doesn't mean someone's seeing your post every day.
Definitely. And on the flip side of that, there's also the element of engagement, like likes and comments and people, sending you DMs. It's funny how many people watch you and actually rave about you, but you never hear from them. There's people who have referred business and I'm like, I don't even know who that is. Yeah. Oh, they follow your Instagram and I heard about you through them. So you never underestimate who's watching and I guess their network and how you could be exposed to that as well.
Do you know what, Emily? I don't think there's been a Tuesday when in the back of my mind, when it's been Tuesday, I haven't thought, Top Tip Tuesday.
Top Tip Tuesday back.
Like it's Tuesday, it's Top Tip Tuesday. And I hadn't even met you before, but it's the subliminal marketing behind it.
Need to bring back Top Tip Tuesday.
You do.
I ran out of tips.
You got Floor Plan Fridays.
Yes, Floor Plan Friday. That's gotten a bit of traction actually. People are very critical of the floor plans we put out, which I love.
I really love the results that you post on the Saturday auctions.
Yeah.
I think that's really fascinating. And like I said, as a buyer myself at the moment, currently on the market, you know, you look at those things and I show my partner and friend, you know what I mean? It gets shared out because it's such fascinating information. And I think people from all walks of life that you can always find a way to talk about property, and it's always going to be an extremely intriguing topic. And I think in the last 2 years, if anything, the talk of property is it's such a massive talking point.
And apparently the talk of Emily in this panel, because we've all obviously consumed your content quite a lot. But we wanted to talk to you about a topic that we thought might be of interest to viewers and to us on the panel as well. We all know that in anyone that watched Selling New York or anything like that, there's a very different model over there in real estate. And there's a buyer's advocate, for want of a better word, and a sales agent on pretty much every transaction. Yes. Very different to Australia, although the buyer's advocate space is growing very rapidly. It's not the norm, if we want to put it that way. Yeah. How do you think that will progress, and do you think we'll ever get to that model here?
Great question. So the American model is why they call themselves realtors, because they actually flip from one side to the other. So they could be acting for the buyer on one property, but then acting for the seller on another. So they're actually dual purpose. What I find interesting about that, and potentially the reason why I think it won't take off here in Australia, is there's a lot of conflict in that. Not so much, you wouldn't act on the one property for both sides, but I think there's a real skill set in buying and there's a real skill set in selling. Yeah. And I think you become, what you call a 360 role, where you're doing both sides of the fence. And I don't know that that's actually to the advantage of the consumer. I personally think you should be really good at one or the other and stick the course and be really niche in that. The other thing with the American model is the seller pays the commission to both of them, right?
5 or 6%,
So
right?
yeah, it's crazy. So how is it entirely independent if the vendor is actually paying for both? When you think about that,
True.
like the buyer's not actually paying to engage the realtor.
And if that show those shows have told you anything, is that the two agents are just trying to make a deal happen.
They're literally,
not
they just want their deal
They
done.
don't really care about their client.
Exactly.
They're just trying to get a deal.
They're not prepared to walk away. Whereas
yeah.
when you have independence, like, God, the amount of deals we've walked away from because it's not the right thing.
Yeah.
And I can tell the agent really wants to get the deal done, but if it's not the right thing by the buyer, then they're my client and they should be the client. And I've always said, if you're not paying, you're not the client. Like, you've really got to think about that. Where your advice comes from and who you're engaging, you should be paying them for advice.
Yeah, there's no doubt wherever the money flows, there's always some you have to be beholden to that person to some degree, right? So if the vendor's paying and you're a buyer's agent, you know,
it's a bit iffy.
It is a bit iffy. There is some positives to that model as well, which means that all the buyers get represented by people that know what they're doing. So if you're new to the market, or you don't understand, or you don't know a new market, you know, you've got someone to represent you and you're not paying. But again, it's that conflict that you've got to worry about. Yeah,
definitely. I think representation is number one. I think as much representation as possible is a really good thing, but I just think the Australian model, I mean, even the concept of a buyer's advocate being the norm in a transaction at the moment is still, you know, evolving. It's not a household name as such, a buyer's advocate. So
although it's I mean, you know,
grown a lot.
you
grown a lot.
heard of buyer's advocate 10 years ago,
It's
right?
an educational piece on it. Not, like 5-10 years ago, not many people knew what a buyer's advocate was. And what you've done with your social media and your branding is educated the masses, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's probably the aim of the game. Whether someone, you know, uses us, I can't be serving everyone, you know. As long as they use an advocate, I'm really happy. That's probably the biggest thing.
What you do. You only have 10 clients at a time.
Yes.
You don't, no matter how busy you are, you won't service more than 10 clients.
No, we have wait lists for that. And I mean, some people would go, we have to wait, but I would rather service, you know, the 10 really well than be like, yes, let everyone come on board. And the other thing is, which I think probably needs to be mandated across the board, is we don't take conflicting profiles. So we'd never have two buyers looking for the same property type, same budget, same area. That's not mandated anywhere. No. That's just because we want to operate a moral business. You know, it's not actually a best practice standard, which I think it should be in the industry.
I like that a lot. Emily, we really want you to give our audience, what's a golden nugget? Like, where are some of the hottest places to buy? Where should potentially someone steer away from? It doesn't have to be either of those things, but a golden nugget piece of information that our viewers can take home.
100%. I think the biggest thing for viewers would be around making sure you realise when you're priced out of a particular market. Sometimes it's really disheartening and hard to actually comprehend that you're priced out of an area that you want to be in. The longer it takes for you to realise that, the more missed opportunity you're having in the surrounding suburbs that you possibly could afford. So the golden nugget would be to be really quick to assess the market and move on. As soon as you realise you can't afford it, move on. What's next? What's the next best thing I can get into? Because it actually will save you money in the long run.
Is that a difficult conversation for you to have with clients? Yeah, I can imagine it would be.
Yes, I feel like I've broken a few hearts in the process of, you know, we're doing discovery calls and people are listing off what they want. I'm like, that doesn't exist. So probably a measurable thing for viewers, if you haven't seen 3 properties in the last 3 months that you would have bought before, you know, you were looking, what you're looking for probably doesn't exist unless it's a very unique thing that pops up, you know, once every 6 months. But generally speaking, 3 properties in the last 3 months within budget in the sold section, otherwise move to another area.
So my 5-bedroom with $1.5 million budget in Brighton. I'm not going to get it? Is that what you're telling me? I'm not going to get my Brighton mansion?
No, probably not.
You know, one thing that I always laugh about, a lot of friends ask me for advice when they're buying property, and they always say, I want to buy a bargain. I want to find a bargain. And you're like, good properties don't sell at a bargain.
If it's a bargain, it's a reason for it.
Yeah, you want a bargain or you want a good property pick.
Yeah,
you know?
yes.
How regional, like how's the sort of Bendigo and Ballarat? I'm hearing those markets are quite hot at the moment. Are they markets that you service as an investment property?
No, we don't personally buy in regional towns, but I'm closely connected with people who do. And we were actually speaking to one of the researchers from CoreLogic recently, and they were giving some interesting stats around the growth that's continued in those regions that's actually well surpassed the metro areas. And I was like, wow, that's really flipped it on its head, because we so often go, well, blue chip suburbs are where you put your money. But at the moment, that would suggest that that's actually not the case in
And
the
no
current
one
market.
can really predict what's happening in the market right now because they keep saying it's going to crash, but it doesn't seem like it's crashing. Does it?
It's cooling.
No.
It's
cooling.
cooling. It's not crashing, I'd say. Yeah.
That's Australia, though, right? We've got a government that loves to underpin our property market, so
Yeah.
they bail us out whenever we need them to.
Any predictions for what's going to happen in the next 12 months on the market?
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest thing is the properties that were compromised, that were really getting snapped up in that buying frenzy, in late sort of 2021, they will remain compromised and they'll struggle and they will sit on the market a bit longer. We're already seeing that a bit. But A-grade property that's quoted fairly, I do think that's going to continue to keep growing and do well. But I think more generally, people's minds, yes, they do focus on property if you're in the market for one, but people aren't leisurely strolling open homes anymore. There's things to do, there's people to see, restaurants are open, activities are back. So I actually think when you're going to open homes, you won't need to line up anymore. There might only be 2 or 3 hands at auction. And so a general prediction would be that I think when a quote range is fair, we won't start seeing it go 10% over. We actually might only see it go maybe 2 or 5% over the top end in an auction situation.
Gosh, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
It's
starting to happen.
Quote ranging being
know,
fair.
Yeah,
Everyone's
quote range being
crying.
fair. And that's the biggest thing. Quote range being fair is probably, the starting point of it actually all making sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I keep interrupting. So, boys, do you have any dying
No,
questions?
I think our producer's saying to wrap up.
He has a habit of doing
He
that.
does.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Emily. I thought that was really awesome, and we got some really good information from that. If there's one thing that I've learned from you, it's obviously all the things about buyer advocacy, of course, but also social media and how important that is, and how you've generated that massive client base and that course content and those kind of things from that following. So I'm going to get a bit more out of my comfort zone.
Definitely.
I might too. And to all of our audience at home, if you are looking to acquire a buyer's advocate, Emily Wallace Buyer's Advocacy, located in...
We're on St Kilda Road and we cover all different pockets of Melbourne, but we can always have a chat.
Fabulous. And I mean, if this didn't convince you to get a buyer's advocate, I don't think anyone will. Oh my goodness, I don't think you.
I think you might need one after your last few weeks of searching.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I'm definitely going to have a chat to Emily after the show. But thank you so much, Emily, for being part of our show. And thank you to everyone for watching another episode of Real Estate Renovators. See you soon.